Now, the European Union appears set to use frozen Russian assets to fund the purchase of arms for Ukraine. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, says he will present the plan to the bloc's leaders this week.
The draft plan would see 90% of the revenues from seized Russian assets being funneled towards an EU-run weapons fund for Ukraine. Nearly 300 billion euros worth of foreign currency, gold and bonds belonging to the Russian central bank were frozen by the West following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 70% of that is held by the Belgium-based institution Euroclear. Over the next 4 years, the profit generated by frozen Russian state assets is expected to be worth up to 27 billion euros. So far, the EU member states have mostly agreed to spend this money on Ukraine, but whether the funds should be used for humanitarian, infrastructure or military purposes is as yet undecided. EU's foreign policy chief Josep Borrell sees potential for weapons purchases.
So after the discussion today, I've seen that there is a strong support. There are some member states that want to have more details, but there is, I think, a strong support to take the revenues, the windfall profits, and to use it to support Ukraine. How? Military, to increment the resources of the European Peace Facility, and also to support the development of the Ukrainian defense industry.
But it's not Borrell or the Commission who will decide. That will depend on the Council of Member States meeting this Thursday and Friday.
Our correspondent Christine Mundwa joins us now from Brussels. So, Christine, these are the profits from Russian assets rather than the assets themselves that will be used to help Ukraine, aren't there? I mean, are there any legal obstacles to this plan?
That's right, Anya. We've got to make sure that that point is clear. It's not the assets themselves, but rather the proceeds or the interest that these assets have accrued since the time that they were seized. Now, you're asking about legal obstacles, and there isn't really a definitive answer to that because some member states, for example, still have questions and concerns around the legality of taking this particular step. But the Commission has done its part in the sense that it's really done a lot of consultations. The idea of using this money from these frozen Russian assets has been touted for a very long time here in Brussels as a way of making Russia pay for this invasion. And of course, the legal aspect of that was a big part of the conversation. So the Commission's done its consultations. It's gone to the European Central Bank, for example, who still has some reservations about making use of these proceeds. Whether or not all those questions have been exhausted and indeed answered remains to be seen. But for now, the Commission is confident of its plan as to the principle of EU member states agreed that they would be using these proceeds to help Ukraine. And now the Commission has made its allocation to say, let's take 90% of those proceeds for the war effort and 10% for budget support for Ukraine.
That's right. The EU Foreign Policy Chief is suggesting 90% should go to a military fund. Do we know what member states think about this?
We know that a number of them are in support of the idea, especially because of the situation that Ukraine finds itself in now, the dwindling resources to fight off that Russian invasion. I have to remind you that the US Congress is still holding up that military aid package. So there is really concerns about additional military aid for Ukraine being urgently needed and not being available. So member states in support of this idea say right now this money needs to go to that, because previous discussions were about using these proceeds to build Ukraine, to reconstruct Ukraine after the war. In recent days, that's taken a shift. There are member states who are uncomfortable with the idea of using this money to fund the war effort. They think, these are states like Hungary and Slovakia, they think that this is essentially escalating this war. They would like to see the war coming to a point of negotiation rather, and they're not comfortable with the idea of using the proceeds for the war effort. So EU leaders are going to sit tomorrow. We don't expect that they'll necessarily take a full decision on this allocation by the Commission, but they'll certainly open up the discussion and we'll get a better sense of where their heads are at as it pertains to this money and its usage for Ukraine.
Christine, thank you so much. That's DW's Christine Mundwa reporting from Brussels.